Hands in the air. Now, the terrified mother screamed as the cops aimed their guns at her children. The sun was setting over the California coastline as the Thompson family pulled into a scenic rest stop just off Highway 1. It was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation, ocean breeze, campfire songs, and roasted marshmallows. Jackson Thompson, a tall, calm black man in his late 30s, stepped out of the SUV and stretched his arms, savoring the golden horizon. His wife Melissa laughed as their twins, Jasmine and Caleb, both 9, raced toward a patch of grass to toss a frisbee. Jackson was not only a loving father, he was also a seasoned FBI agent with a spotless record, a decorated career, and a reputation for keeping his cool under pressure. But on this day, none of that would matter. As Melissa unpacked the cooler, 2 patrol cars suddenly pulled into the lot. Their lights weren't flashing, and their sirens were silent. Yet the energy shifted immediately. Jackson noticed the tension in the air as 2 white officers stepped out, hands already resting on their holsters. His instincts kicked in. He had seen this before too many times just from the other side. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," one of the officers barked, hand moving to his taser. Jackson looked confused but kept his hands visible. "Is there a problem?" Officer Jackson asked calmly, noting their aggressive posture. He motioned subtly for Melissa to stay near the kids. "We got a call about a suspicious black male loading something into a dark SUV," the second officer said coldly. "License plate matches yours." Jackson blinked. "Sir, that's my family. We just arrived here 10 minutes ago." "Don't move," I said. "Step away from the car." Melissa rushed forward, instinctively shielding her kids. "Please don't point your guns at my children," she cried out, voice trembling. One officer pulled out his weapon. "Back away, ma'am, hands where I can see them, all of you." The children froze. Jasmine began crying and Caleb clutched his mother's hand. Jackson slowly raised both arms. "I'm complying. You're making a mistake." "Shut up," the officer shouted. "On your knees." The second officer grabbed his radio. "Possible 1032 in progress. Request backup." Blackmail resisting. Jackson's eyes widened. He wasn't resisting, he hadn't moved. Every word was calculated, every movement controlled, but none of that mattered to them. They didn't see a father. They didn't see an FBI badge tucked in his wallet. They just saw what they wanted to see. "Daddy, what's happening?" Jasmine cried, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson turned his head slightly, keeping his eyes forward. "It's okay, baby. Just stay close to mommy. Everything will be all right." But he wasn't so sure. Just then, one of the officers lunged forward, grabbed Jackson by the shoulders, and slammed him face first onto the pavement. Melissa screamed, "Stop, he's not doing anything." The other officer restrained her, pushing her roughly toward the SUV. Inside Jackson's pocket was his ID, his federal badge, but he knew not to reach for it. Not now, not with guns drawn, not with his kids watching. The ground was hot beneath Jackson's cheek, the grit of the pavement digging into his skin. His heart pounded not from fear for himself, but from the thought of what his children were seeing. Jasmine had stopped crying. She was now frozen in place, mouth open, hands still raised like her mother's. Caleb was trembling, clutching Melissa's shirt so tightly it wrinkled beneath his fingers. Jackson stayed silent, his training kicking in. He'd handled hostage situations, de-escalated volatile standoffs, but never in his life had he been this powerless, this exposed. And all because the officers in front of him saw his skin before they saw the badge in his wallet. I said, "Do you have any weapons on you?" The officer kneeling on his back growled. "No, sir," Jackson said calmly. "My ID is in my front left pocket. Please don't reach for it without warning. I'm federal." "What did you say?" the officer snapped, still holding him down. "I'm a federal agent," Jackson repeated, voice low but firm. "FBI, badge number 47928, call it in." The 2 officers paused for a moment, exchanging a glance, but their suspicion didn't waver. "Yeah, right," the one with the gun muttered. "Everyone's a federal agent when they get caught." Melissa stepped forward, her voice desperate. "Please just check his badge. Look in his pocket. He's telling the truth." The officer with the gun motioned for the other to hold tight. He slowly approached Jackson and patted his left pocket. When he pulled out the badge and saw the gold shield with the unmistakable lettering, Federal Bureau of Investigation, his face stiffened. Silence was deafening. Jackson turned his head, slightly wincing. "Now would be a good time to let me up." The officer hesitated, then stood. The one kneeling on Jackson scrambled to his feet awkwardly. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" he asked, voice defensive now. "I did," Jackson said, brushing off his shirt. "Twice." The family rushed to him as soon as he stood. Melissa wrapped her arms around him, her face a mixture of fury and relief. Jasmine finally broke down again, sobbing into his side, while Caleb buried his face in his father's waist. "You traumatized my kids," Jackson said, now facing the officers with steel in his voice. "You pointed weapons at a family on vacation, shoved a federal agent into the ground, and never once asked for identification until after drawing your guns." First officer stammered. We had a call, a tip about a possible armed suspect matching what Jackson interrupted. "A black man with a nice SUV and his family. Is that the threat now?" The second officer looked away, clearly shaken, but the first one doubled down. "You match the description." Jackson stepped closer. "You better hope the dash cams were rolling and the body mics, because I promise you I'll be requesting every second of it." Melissa snapped a photo of the officers' badge numbers before they could move. Neither of them said a word. A third car finally arrived. This time, a lieutenant stepped out. She was Latina in her 40s with a clear sense of command. She took one look at Jackson's face, then the kids, then the two officers, shifting nervously. "Report," she said crisply. Jackson spoke first. "I was detained, thrown to the ground in front of my family, and threatened with firearms. I'm Special Agent Jackson Thompson, FBI. I showed my badge after being assaulted." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed as she turned to her officers. "Is this true?" "Ma'am, we received a report." She raised a hand. "Enough. Go sit in your vehicles. Now." The officers obeyed, tails tucked. The lieutenant walked closer and lowered her voice. "Agent Thompson, I deeply apologize. This should never have happened." Jackson exhaled, jaw still tense. "Tell that to my kids. They just watched their dad get slammed into the ground for doing nothing." The lieutenant nodded. "We'll file a full report. I'll make sure it goes to IA. Do you need medical assistance?" "No," Jackson said. "But my children need a reason to believe that justice still works. I need to show them this isn't the world they'll grow up accepting." Melissa was quiet for the first time since it happened. Her voice cracked. "What if you weren't FBI? What if you didn't have that badge?" Jackson looked at her. "Then I wouldn't be standing here." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The ride back to the hotel was quiet. Too quiet. The twins sat in the back seat, neither speaking. Jasmine stared out the window, her small fingers clenched into fists on her lap. Caleb leaned his head against the door, face blank. Melissa reached back to hold their hands while Jackson gripped the steering wheel tighter than he realized. Every red light felt longer than it should. Every breath he took had weight. He was still running through the scenario in his mind, retracing every second, the approach, the shouting, the guns, the ground. "Jackson?" Melissa's voice finally broke through. "We have to report this." "We will," he said. "I already made the call to the Bureau. Internal Affairs will follow up. But it's not about punishment. I want this documented. For them." He glanced at the rearview mirror, eyes locking briefly with Caleb's. Back at the hotel, Jackson sat the twins down on the edge of the bed. They looked up at him, eyes wide. "I want to talk to you both," he said gently. "I know what happened today was scary, and I know it wasn't fair." Jasmine bit her lip. "Why did they do that to you, Daddy? You didn't do anything." Jackson sat beside her. "Because sometimes people judge you before they know you. They see your skin before they see your heart. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong." "Are you going to arrest them?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jackson shook his head. "That's not how this works, but I filed a report and we'll make sure this doesn't get buried." Melissa sat across from them, her arms crossed, still visibly shaken. "We also need to talk about therapy. For the kids, for us too." "I already reached out to the Bureau's counselor," Jackson said. "They'll get us in tomorrow morning." That night, Jackson couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling while Melissa turned beside him. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of his daughter's trembling hands and his son's silent shock came rushing back. At 3:00 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, Rico, a fellow agent in D.C. "Heard what happened? I'm livid. Tell me everything. We've got your back." The support came in waves over the next 2 days. Colleagues, supervisors, friends. Even the assistant director of the FBI personally called to check in and assured Jackson that a full investigation would begin immediately. But something unexpected also happened. A bystander at the beach, someone neither Jackson nor Melissa had noticed, had filmed the entire altercation from a distance. That video made its way online, and it spread like wildfire. In the clip, viewers saw two white officers confronting a calm black man and his family. They heard the screams, saw the guns, and watched as a man who repeated, "I'm a federal agent," was thrown to the ground. Then they saw the badge. The moment of stunned silence. The expression of the children. Outrage exploded on social media. Drushi worry, not just another black man, he's FBI. Justice for Thompson? By noon, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. Reporters camped outside the hotel. Jackson declined all interviews, but Melissa issued a short statement. We are thankful my husband is safe, but the trauma inflicted on our children cannot be undone. No family should have to prove their humanity. That line, no family should have to prove their humanity, went viral. Civil rights organizations contacted them. Community leaders reached out, and soon an emergency town hall meeting was called in the local jurisdiction. But not everyone was on their side. Under the video, trolls posted comments blaming Jackson for not identifying himself clearly. Others claimed the officers acted appropriately based on the call they received. Some even questioned whether the badge was real. Jackson expected it. He was trained to expect backlash, even in the face of truth. But now it wasn't just about him. It was about the message his children were receiving from the world. He sat them down again that evening, this time showing them the outpouring of support online. Messages from other black professionals, parents, police officers who denounced the behavior. See this, he told Jasmine and Caleb, showing them one video of a former police chief speaking up. People are standing up, not just for me, but for us, for all families who've gone through this and didn't have a voice. Melissa joined in, holding their hands. You're part of something bigger now. Your story is helping others. But I don't want to be famous, Jasmine mumbled. You're not, Jackson said softly. You're brave. 3 days after the incident, the Thompson family returned to the same spot it all began. The rest stop by the ocean looked exactly the same gentle wind, the same rocky guardrail, the same sky stretching toward the water. But for Jackson, Melissa, and their kids, everything had changed. This time, there were no police cruisers, no shouting, no weapons. There was only silence and the heavy presence of local journalists, community leaders, and residents who had gathered after seeing the viral video. The city had called an emergency press conference. Jackson hadn't planned to speak. In fact, he had initially declined when the mayor's office called. But last night, after tucking the twins into bed, he and Melissa stayed up late talking. Not just about the trauma, but about purpose, about what it meant to be seen, about what message they wanted their children and other families watching to receive. Now standing behind a podium set up on the sidewalk, Jackson wore a dark blazer and an FBI pin on his lapel. Melissa stood nearby, holding Jasmine's hand, while Caleb sat cross-legged on a picnic bench, listening intently. The mayor, a white woman in her 50s, gave the opening remarks and publicly apologized to the Thompson family. Her words were carefully crafted, sincere but measured. She promised reform, review, and retraining. Jackson listened without emotion. Words were just words. When it was his turn, the crowd went still. He adjusted the mic, took a breath, and looked out across the faces watching him, some angry, some supportive, some still trying to understand. My name is Jackson Thompson, he began. I'm a husband, a father, and a special agent with the FBI. Cameras clicked, phones rose. But last week, none of that mattered. To 2 officers who approached my family, I was just a threat, a suspect, a problem to be neutralized. My kids were just collateral. He paused, letting the words hang. I've spent my life believing in justice, upholding it, working within the system to make it better. But what happened here isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that too many of us know too well. A few in the crowd nodded. Some looked down ashamed. When those officers slammed me to the ground in front of my children, he continued, voice firm, they didn't just bruise my skin. They branded my kids with a fear that no apology can erase. My daughter still flinches when she sees flashing lights. My son asked if they would have shot me if I wasn't FBI. He turned slightly, locking eyes with Melissa for strength. I came here today not to condemn, but to challenge. To challenge every department that still trains fear instead of fairness. To challenge every community that watches injustice unfold and says, it's not our problem. To challenge every leader who waits for a tragedy before acting. Another pause. If we want real change, we need to stop pretending that these incidents are mistakes. They're symptoms. And like any illness, they need treatment, not silence. The crowd broke into applause, soft at first, then stronger. Jackson closed his speech with quiet strength. We're not just victims. We're not just headlines. We're families. We're citizens. And we're not going anywhere. He stepped back. Reporters shouted questions. Agent Thompson, will you sue the department? What did the FBI say about the officers involved? Is your family safe now? He said nothing more. His message was done. As the family walked back to their car, An older black woman approached them, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, touching Melissa's arm. "You spoke for all of us." Melissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "For our kids," she said softly, "always." The world would keep spinning. The news cycle would move on. But Jackson knew something had shifted. His children had seen the worst, but also the power of standing tall. They had watched their father be dehumanized, and then seen him rise with dignity. For now, that was enough. Jackson sat quietly in the corner of the hotel room, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling on the nightstand beside him. The soft hum of traffic outside the window was the only noise breaking the heavy silence inside. Melissa was in the bathroom, dabbing her swollen eyes with a cold cloth. The kids, both curled up on the bed, had finally drifted off to sleep after hours of trembling, whispering, and asking questions no parent should ever have to answer. He couldn't stop replaying the scene in his mind, Melissa screaming, Jasmine frozen in fear, Caleb with tears running silently down his face, and then him face down on the pavement, arms restrained behind his back like a criminal. He had trained for high-pressure moments, had walked into buildings with armed suspects and outsmarted seasoned criminals, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of being dehumanized in front of his children. His phone vibrated. It was his supervisor at the FBI. "Agent Thompson, I just got off the phone with the assistant director. We're aware of what happened. Stay where you are. A team is reviewing all local reports and dash cam footage. This will not be swept under the rug." Jackson exhaled through his nose. Understood. "But Jackson," the voice continued, "you should know. Someone filmed the whole thing. It's already online." Jackson closed his eyes, dread pooling in his chest. Within an hour, Melissa's phone lit up with notifications. Her friend from college sent a shaky clip. "Is this your family?" she wrote. The video showed it all. Cops yelling, guns drawn, children crying. Jackson calmly repeating, "I am an FBI agent. Please check my badge." And then the takedown. The moment his face hit the concrete, the scream of his wife, the trembling of his daughter's voice. It took less than 6 hours for the clip to go viral. The internet exploded. "Shuri justice for Thompson, he's FBI. This is America." Every outlet picked it up. Talk shows, morning news, podcasts. Civil rights activists were calling for the officer's suspension. Public officials scrambled to issue statements. But none of it reached Jackson the way his daughter's voice did when she asked Daddy, "Are we safe now?" Later that evening, Jackson and Melissa sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Caleb was asleep in his mother's lap. Jasmine, too anxious to rest, sat in a chair near her father, drawing circles on the foggy glass with her finger. "I didn't want this," Jackson said quietly. "Not like this. Not through trauma." Melissa reached over and took his hand. "But it's already happened, and now people are watching. You know what that means?" Jackson nodded. "Responsibility." "No," she said gently. "Opportunity." The next day, the mayor held a press conference. "We are deeply disturbed by the events that unfolded at our coastal rest area involving Special Agent Jackson Thompson and his family. An internal investigation is underway. Both officers have been placed on administrative leave pending review. But it wasn't enough, not for the people. Protests began forming outside the precinct. Signs reading "FBI, not a threat," "Black father, not a criminal, and he told you who he was," filled the sidewalks. Jackson refused interviews at first. But when a community group invited him to speak privately to families who'd experienced similar traumas, he agreed. He stood in a modest church basement, facing a circle of about 20 people, some young, some old, all carrying invisible scars. "I'm not here to speak as an FBI agent," he began. "I'm here as a father, a husband, a black man who, despite a badge and a title, was still seen as a threat." He paused, letting the truth settle like dust in the room. Systemic change doesn't start with press releases. It starts with conversations, with community, with accountability. An elderly woman stood and clutched a photo of her son. "They did it to you," she said, voice cracking. "And you're FBI. What hope is there for the rest of us?" Jackson walked over, took her hand, and said, "Hope lives here, in this room, in our refusal to stay silent." That night, Jackson began drafting a plan. He called it Shielded Families, a support network for families affected by police misconduct, particularly those involving children. Melissa helped design the logo. Jasmine insisted on choosing the colors blue like Dad's suit, and gold because we're strong. Within days, the project went live. Lawyers volunteered to help. Therapists offered pro bono hours. Activists offered to amplify their cause. And something unexpected began happening. Officers from across the country, quietly, anonymously sent messages of support. One read, "I've been in law enforcement for 19 years. What happened to you was wrong. Thank you for standing up and still believing we can do better." Another, "You're giving my teenage son, who's afraid of wearing his hoodie after sunset, someone to look up to. Thank you." But not everyone was supportive. Hate mail came in, threats, calls to stop stirring division. One email simply read, "Next time we won't miss." Jackson didn't flinch. He changed nothing. If anything, it confirmed exactly why shielded families needed to exist. The media shifted its tone from treating him as a headline to recognizing him as a leader. Schools began inviting him to speak. University students started fundraisers. A major streaming service even reached out about a possible documentary. But Jackson stayed grounded. "This isn't my story," he told Melissa. "It's ours, and it's just beginning." One evening, Jasmine brought home a drawing she made at school. It showed a superhero in a suit badge, shining cape flapping in the wind. Across the top, she wrote in big block letters, "My dad is braver than Batman." He hung it in his office, right above his shielded family's mission statement. And beneath both, a single line he wrote in permanent marker, "Let the world see us not as threats but as the families we are." The calls never stopped. From the moment Jackson's speech at the community center had been quietly posted online by a college student, it had amassed over 1 million views in under 48 hours. His words had struck a nerve raw, honest, and deeply needed. The FBI had remained officially supportive, though clearly wary. Jackson's direct supervisor called him with a half-concerned, half-impressed tone. "You're doing good work," he'd said cautiously. "Just be careful how you carry that badge in the public eye." Jackson knew what that meant. He was now walking a razor's edge, advocating for justice without stepping outside the institution that gave him credibility. But there was no turning back. Melissa was now managing most of the shielded family's coordination efforts. Their living room had turned into a command center. Whiteboards, laptops, charts of trauma recovery models, and city-by-city contacts. "We've gotten over 200 messages this morning alone," she said, flipping through emails. "This one's from a teacher in Baltimore. She wants to start a support circle for students whose parents have had negative police encounters." Jackson looked over her shoulder and nodded. "Send her the starter pack. I'll try to call her this afternoon." Caleb and Jasmine sat in the corner, quietly drawing. Their pictures had shifted lately from trees and rockets to families holding hands under words like "safe" and "listen." One morning, Jackson woke to find the front page of a major national paper displaying a split image: on one side, the grainy still of him being handcuffed. On the other, his face behind a podium, firm and composed. The headline read, "From Detained to Determined, the man behind shielded families." He stared at it for a long time, unsure how to feel. That afternoon, he got the call. Agent Thompson said, a voice he didn't recognize. "My name is Maya Keller. I'm a staff liaison with the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're preparing hearings on police accountability reform. The chair would like to invite you to testify." Jackson blinked. "Testify as in front of Congress?" "Yes. Your story and your work has already been referenced in multiple briefings. The nation is watching." The following week, Jackson walked through the marbled halls of the Capitol building, nerves hidden behind a sharp suit and a firm jawline. Melissa had accompanied him but waited in a nearby room with Jasmine, who had insisted on coming. "I want to hear them listen to Dad," she'd said. As he sat at the long table flanked by lawyers, activists, and policy experts, Jackson realized the weight of the moment. His words would not just be heard, they would be recorded, archived, analyzed. The room fell silent as the chair gave him the nod to begin. He leaned into the microphone. "My name is Jackson Thompson. I am an FBI agent, a husband, a father, and last month I was tackled to the ground in front of my children because 2 officers saw my skin before they saw my badge." A hush rippled through the chamber. He continued, "I am not here to dismantle the system. I'm here because I believe it can be rebuilt stronger, fairer, safer. Not just for people like me, but for every family in every city who fears the sound of sirens more than the criminals they're meant to catch." He spoke for 9 minutes, no notes, just truth. And when he was done, the room clapped, not out of protocol, but from a place deeper. Even a few lawmakers from across the aisle nodded. Later that night, back in their hotel, Jasmine curled up beside her father. "You sounded like a superhero," she said sleepily. He chuckled. "I don't think superheroes get nervous before speaking." She looked up. "But you still did it." But not all applause was supportive. 3 days later, Shielded Family's website was attacked. A cyber breach defaced the homepage with racial slurs. Their donation portal was disabled. Hate messages flooded their inbox. Jackson was furious. They're trying to silence this. The more visible we get, the more they'll come. Melissa touched his hand. Then we get louder, but we protect ourselves. The FBI's cyber unit stepped in and patched the breach, but it was a wake-up call. The next day, their home security was upgraded. The kids were driven to school by agents for a week, and Jackson received a quiet message from a friend in the bureau. There are eyes on you, Jack, not just the good kind. Watch your six. Despite it all, momentum kept building. Colleges hosted virtual forums with Jackson. Shielded families launched trauma support toolkits for schools. 2 city police departments reached out asking if Jackson could help consult on new training frameworks. One evening, while reviewing applications for a pilot program in Georgia, Melissa turned to Jackson. This thing we built, it's no longer ours. Jackson nodded. That's exactly how it should be. That weekend, they took the kids to the park for the first time in weeks. No interviews, no speeches, just swings and ice cream and sunshine. Caleb chased pigeons while Jasmine practiced handstands. For a brief moment, everything was still. Jackson watched them, one hand in Melissa's. Do you think they'll remember the bad parts of all this? She smiled. They'll remember what we did with it. Later that night, Jackson sat alone at his desk reading through one last message before bed. It was from a police officer in Michigan. I watched your testimony. I cried in my patrol car. I joined the force to protect, but I never realized how much fear we create just by showing up. I want to be better. I want to help. Thank you for reminding me why I joined in the first place. Jackson stared at the screen, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to cry. Not because of anger, not because of fear, but because he knew they were making a crack in the armor of a system that had felt unbreakable. And through that crack, light was beginning to pour in. By the 3rd month, Shielded Families was no longer just a grassroots initiative. It had grown into a full-fledged national organization with legal partners in 16 states' therapy services, spanning urban and rural communities, and an official federal grant pending approval. Jackson was no longer just its founder, he had become its face. The media had given him a nickname, the Reluctant Reformer. He didn't love it. He hadn't asked for this spotlight, but he knew the responsibility came with the reach. Every day he received more emails, more voicemails from families with stories like his. Some worse. But nothing prepared him for the letter that arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. He opened it slowly, the handwriting unfamiliar, almost trembling in its hesitation. Agent Thompson. You don't know me by name, but I know yours. I was one of the 2 officers that day. I was the one who put you face down on the pavement. I have not known peace since. If you'll let me, I'd like to talk. No cameras, no excuses. Just honesty. Jackson stared at the paper for a long time. He told Melissa first. She paused, holding her coffee mid-sip. You're going to meet him, she asked. I don't know yet, Jackson replied. She sat down beside him, gently setting the cup aside. Why would he reach out now? Because something changed in him, Jackson said. Or maybe he's hoping something can. A week later, in a small neutral meeting room at a Shielded Family satellite office, Jackson waited alone. He had requested no cameras, no legal teams, not even Melissa. Just 2 men in a room. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the door opened. It was him. The officer looked older, more tired than Jackson remembered. He wore a simple button-up and carried no badge. Just nervous energy. Agent Thompson, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Jackson, he replied, offering a handshake. It was accepted, but briefly. They sat across from each other. Silence settled like dust. I don't expect you to forgive me, the man began. And I'm not here to ask for that. I need you to know that I saw the video afterward, and I saw my daughter cry watching it. Jackson said nothing. I told her you didn't resist, that I made a mistake, and she asked, then why did you treat him like that? The officer blinked hard. I had no answer. He looked up. I was trained to control a situation fast. I wasn't trained to see the people in it. That's not an excuse, it's the problem. Jackson leaned back. So why come here? Because I want to change that problem. I left the force. I've been working in de-escalation training since. And when I saw what Shielded Families was doing, I thought, maybe I could help. Jackson studied him. Why would I trust you around victims of trauma you helped cause? The man took out a worn journal and set it on the table. This is every session I've taken since leaving. Every note, every apology I've never sent. I've been doing the work, quietly, but it's not enough anymore. He looked Jackson in the eyes. You said in your speech, reform isn't about punishment, it's about responsibility. I'm ready for mine. The room was quiet again. Jackson finally spoke. You broke something in front of my children. I know. And you want to help fix what you broke in others. The man nodded. Then you don't get a platform, Jackson said firmly. You get the work. The hard, silent work. That's all I want. 3 months later, the former officer, now known only by his first name, Michael, began co-teaching de-escalation courses under Shielded Families Rehabilitation Pilot Program. He was never introduced as the one from the video. No one knew. Only Jackson, Melissa, and the training team were aware. And that's how Jackson wanted it. Not about redemption, about reparation. At home, Jasmine noticed her father smiling more. You okay, Daddy? She asked one night, curling beside him on the couch. He looked at her and nodded. I think someone finally listened. To you. To what we all needed to say. The next time Jackson spoke at a public forum, he shared a story not about violence, but about change. Real change is quiet at first. It's not the shout. It's the moment someone finally lowers their voice and leans in. He paused, scanning the crowd. I've seen what it looks like when someone returns not for forgiveness, but for responsibility. And that's when you know the system may be broken, but people inside it can choose something better. The audience erupted into applause. Melissa stood in the back, hands folded, eyes shining with quiet pride. And somewhere off stage in the shadows, Michael listened too. It was a quiet Saturday morning. For once, no interviews, no panels, no press inquiries. Melissa had just pulled pancakes off the griddle. Jasmine was setting the table with her usual perfectionism, and Caleb was miraculously not glued to a screen. Jackson leaned back in his chair, smiling as he sipped his coffee. For a moment, they were just a family again. Then his phone vibrated. He almost didn't check it, but habit was a powerful thing. A message flashed on the screen. Breaking unarmed black teen shot by police during traffic stop. Victim identified as 18-year-old Jalen Cooper. Jackson stared at the headline. It didn't move. It didn't go away. It burned. He clicked the link. The image loaded slowly, a school photo, Jalen in a navy blue cap and gown, smiling at the camera with the pride of someone standing on the edge of their future. Now his future was gone. Melissa saw his face change instantly. Another one, she whispered. Jackson nodded. The kids paused. Jasmine tilted her head. Someone like you, Dad. He swallowed hard. Someone like all of us. By noon, the story had already ignited the internet. Jalen had been pulled over for a broken taillight. No weapon, no threats, no time to explain. 4 shots, he died on the scene. A bystander recorded the aftermath, the officer pacing hand on head, muttering, he moved too fast. But Jalen's hands had been up. The footage showed that much. Within hours, a crowd had formed near the police station. Candle signs, anger, grief. The same cycle over and over. And amid the rising noise, Jackson's name was trending again. Where is Jackson Thompson? The Shielded Family's inbox flooded. Jalen's mother reached out through an attorney. She wanted Jackson, not for a press conference, not for a legal opinion, for strength. I just want someone who survived it, she said in a voice note. Please, please come. Jackson sat alone in the hallway, the message still playing through his earbuds when Melissa approached. You don't have to, she said. I know. You've already given so much. He nodded. But I've never been able to give them peace. Not before the pain. Only after. Melissa sat beside him. So, are we doing this? He looked her in the eyes. I think we have to. That evening, the family arrived in Metro City under the cover of dusk. The protest outside the precinct was swelling, but Jackson didn't go there first. He went to the small worn house on the corner of Pine Street, Jalen's home. Teresa Cooper, a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking, opened the door. Agent Thompson, she asked softly. Jackson stepped forward. Just Jackson, please. She let him in. They didn't talk about policies or justice or police reform. They talked about Jalen, his dream of becoming a sports therapist, his goofy sense of humor, the time he got suspended for hacking the school lunch system to get extra cookies. And then she showed him the shirt he was wearing the night he died, still folded in a plastic evidence bag. Untouched. Final. I don't want to march, she said. I want to make sure no mother feels what I'm feeling. Jackson understood. The next day, the press caught wind of his presence. Reporters swarmed the candlelight vigil, but Jackson stood off to the side, holding a small candle, head bowed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The community noticed. Jalen's classmates approached him one by one. Some cried. Some asked for hugs. One young boy asked, will they ever stop shooting us? Jackson crouched down. They'll stop when enough of us stand up. Back at the hotel that night, Jackson sat with his laptop open. Melissa typed beside him, coordinating the legal aid. Jasmine and Caleb slept on the bed, curled around each other like a shield of innocence. Then an alert pinged on his screen. A well-known sheriff had just released a statement blaming Jalen for noncompliance. Commenters were spreading lies. The family was being doxxed. Melissa looked over. "We need to push back. We need a statement." Jackson stared at the blinking cursor in the empty email draft. Then he spoke slowly. "No, not a statement, a declaration." The next day in front of the courthouse, Jackson stood with Teresa Cooper and her attorney. He read from a paper he had written that morning. Jalen Cooper was 18, unarmed, obedient, hopeful. He was not a threat. He was not a mistake. He was a son, a friend, a future stolen. If you believe in justice only when it's convenient, you don't believe in justice at all. We are not here to demand vengeance. We are here to demand recognition. You saw the footage. You saw the truth. Now we ask, what will you do with it? There was no applause, no chanting, just silence, and the tears of a mother who had not been abandoned. That night back in the hotel room, Jasmine asked, will it change anything this time? Jackson held her close. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know what happens if we say nothing." She nodded slowly. "Then let's keep saying something." Within a week of the vigil for Jalen Cooper, Shielded Families launched its most ambitious campaign yet. They called it Safe Start, a national push for legislative reform to mandate body cams with live transmission, trauma-informed training for all first responders, and a national database tracking officer misconduct accessible to the public. It wasn't just about Jalen anymore. It was about the 63 names added to their internal list this year alone. And it wasn't just Jackson leading the charge. It was teachers, lawyers, social workers, students, people who refused to go back to normal. Jackson testified again, this time before a bipartisan panel of lawmakers tasked with police oversight. He didn't use any dramatic rhetoric. He simply read the names. One by one, Jalen Cooper, Elijah White, Darnell Mays, Amari Sutton. Some in the room shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their gaze. One congresswoman wiped her eyes. When he finished, Jackson looked up. These aren't data points. These were teenagers with favorite songs, broken phones, half-written dreams. Safe Start isn't just policy, it's a promise. The room stood in applause. The campaign went viral. Celebrities reposted Jackson's speech. An NBA team wore his quote on their warm-ups. The White House press secretary referenced Shielded Families during a briefing. For a moment, it felt like the tide was turning. Then the threats began. It started small, a slashed tire, then hateful messages scribbled on the nonprofit's front door. An email. "We're watching. Stay in your lane." FBI cybersecurity flagged multiple login attempts to Jackson's private files. Melissa was followed in a grocery store parking lot. It escalated when Caleb's school received a bomb threat under an anonymous email titled, "Thompson's legacy ends here." They evacuated. No bomb was found, but the message was clear. That night, Jackson sat in the dark living room, phone in hand, eyes red but focused. Melissa stood in the doorway. "We need to stop," she said quietly. "At least take a break, pull back from the cameras, regroup." He didn't answer. She walked closer. "I'm not saying give up. I'm saying don't burn out while they try to burn you." He looked up at her. "What if this is what it takes?" She knelt beside him. "Then we take it together. But not like this. Not at the expense of our children." He reached over, took her hand, and nodded. "I'll step back for a few weeks. Let others speak. Let the movement grow without me in every frame." Shielded Families issued a statement. Effective immediately, Agent Jackson Thompson will step back from public appearances to focus on internal development and family safety. Our mission continues, fueled by many voices, not just one. Public reaction was mixed. Some called him brave. Others called him soft. A few accused him of hiding. He ignored them all. Instead, he taught private workshops to new organizers. He reviewed city proposals for community liaisons. He sat in small rooms with mothers who had no cameras, no public support, only pain, and a folder of autopsy reports. That was where he knew the real fight lived. But the darkness didn't let go. One night, a package arrived at their home addressed to the hero. Melissa opened it. Inside was a stuffed bear, covered in red paint. No note, no sender. Just a warning dressed as a toy. She didn't scream. She just picked it up, placed it in a bag, and calmly called the bureau. The next morning, federal agents installed 24/7 surveillance. Caleb asked, "Are we in danger?" Jackson knelt beside him. "We're always in danger when we stand up for what's right, but we're never alone, and we're never afraid." Caleb nodded slowly, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. A few days later, Jackson received a private invitation to a secure roundtable hosted by the president's office on community safety. He debated declining. Melissa encouraged him to go. "You didn't ask for the spotlight," she said, "but you earned the right to use it." So he went. In that meeting, sitting across from state leaders and national security officials, Jackson did not make demands. He offered systems, community trauma response hubs, an app for civilians to rate police interactions in real time, pre-shift officer wellness check-ins. "They don't just need to protect us," he said. "They need to understand us. And that begins with mental health transparency and truth." The vice president leaned forward. "Are you ready to help us write this into national policy?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Yes." That night, as he tucked Jasmine into bed, she asked, "Did they listen this time?" Jackson smiled. "I think they finally heard us." She yawned. "Are we still doing the right thing?" He kissed her forehead. "Always." The next day, as he reviewed case files in the shielded family's office, he received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It was of him and his family. At a park. Newar. From a distance, on the back, hand written in shaky black ink, it read, "You can't change what was built to break you." He stared at it for a long time, then pulled out a pen, turned it over, and wrote, "Maybe not, but I can build something stronger." It was the night before the official signing ceremony of the National Community Safety and Policing Equity Act, a bill shaped heavily by shielded families' frameworks. Jackson stood alone in his hotel room in D.C., staring out the 19th floor window. The Capitol building was lit like a beacon across the city skyline. His name wasn't on the bill, not officially, but every paragraph in Section 3 on trauma-informed response, on family-first de-escalation protocols, on nationwide misconduct tracking, was born from the fire of his lived experience. There was no pride in it, only responsibility. He turned when Melissa stepped into the room. "Tomorrow's the end of something," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, it's the beginning. For them." She walked closer. "And what about you?" Jackson exhaled. "That's the question, isn't it?" The next morning, inside the White House Rose Garden, as officials and press gathered, Jackson stood to the side with his family, not at the podium, but just close enough to witness the moment. When the president held up the signed bill, cameras flashed. Reporters cheered. And for a few seconds, a chant rose from the audience. "Shielded families, shielded families." Jackson turned to Melissa and smiled. "We built something they can't ignore anymore." But just as he reached for her hand, a man in a suit tapped his shoulder. "Mr. Thompson," he said in a low voice, "we need to talk. In private." Jackson's smile faded. "Now." The man nodded gravely. Inside a small secured room, the official placed a tablet in front of Jackson and hit play. The screen showed grainy surveillance footage from a rural precinct out west. An officer was holding a teenager, down knee on his back hand, gripping his hair. Another officer was filming and laughing. Jackson's jaw tightened. They knew the cameras were on, the official said. They wanted to be seen. They mentioned your name, said they weren't scared of your soft policies. Jackson felt his pulse rise. "You're telling me this because they're daring you to show up." Jackson looked down at his hands. He could see Jasmine's drawing in his mind, the one that said he was braver than Batman. But what she never drew were the scars, the cost. He closed his eyes for a second, then stood up. 2 days later, Jackson was on a plane. Not to confront, not to arrest, but to protect. When he arrived in that small town, the air was dry, the tension thicker than the heat. Protesters already lined the street outside the precinct. Reporters hovered nearby, waiting for a statement. Instead, Jackson walked into the community center down the block. Inside were 20 parents, all afraid, all unsure how to protect their children from the very people sworn to protect them. Jackson didn't give a speech. He sat in a circle with them. "Tell me your stories," he said. And they did, one by one. And as they spoke, the fire in him reignited, not as rage, but as clarity. That evening, the officer involved was suspended. The one who filmed it resigned. Internal Affairs had launched a full investigation. But it wasn't over. Because pain doesn't evaporate with consequences. It needs healing. Back home, Jackson stood outside his house as dusk settled over the neighborhood. Jasmine sat on the porch steps, a notebook in her lap. She looked up. "Did they do it again?" "Yes." "Did you stop them?" He nodded. "I helped." She paused, then asked, "Is that what heroes do?" Jackson smiled, sitting beside her. "No, that's what people do when they don't forget." She leaned against him. "Can I help too someday?" "You already are." She showed him what she was writing. It wasn't a poem, not a journal entry, but a letter to the children in the town he had just visited. "Dear kids, My dad says you're brave even if you're scared. He told me being brave is when you keep loving the world, even when the world doesn't always love you back. I hope you have someone who believes in you like I believe in my dad. And I hope you know, it's okay to cry and still be strong. From Jasmine T. That night Jackson framed it. Not because it made him proud. Because it reminded him this was never about him. It was about what came next. 1 year later, Jackson stood on a small stage at a local high school graduation. The school had invited him to give a closing message. He almost said no. But when he stood behind the mic looking out at the sea of young black and brown faces, he knew there was one thing left to say. Some of you will be told you don't belong in certain rooms, that your voice isn't valid, that your safety depends on how polite you are. But I'm here to tell you, you deserve to exist loudly, proudly, completely. He paused. I once thought justice was a destination, but I've learned it's a practice. One we live, one we pass on. The students rose to their feet in applause. And for the first time in years, Jackson Thompson felt not the burden of survival, but the quiet, powerful grace of legacy.